Today's Gemara. The Year of Learning by Sue and Arnie Gerlich in memory of Malka Perlman and Philip Mann, and Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Henry Rivka Pro Rosner Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Cheryl Scher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Arav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Liska, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler China Bas Yeshaya, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova Bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka Bat Yosef, friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim. We have a month of learning by Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his brother Yaakov ben Avraham, Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of his father David ben Fishel Halevi, and her mother Bela Bas Avraham, Dov Budlander, his wife Udal Bas Yehuda Tzvi, as well as a month of learning sponsored by Stephanie and Fred Mortman for the refuah shlema of her daughter Mazal Bat Sarah Malka. Today is the 29th, and we have a day of learning by myself and Karen in memory of my father, Mordechai Yehuda ben Binyamin, as well as by Edward and Ruth Goldberg in memory of his mother, Hudel Bas Yecheskel. May Hashemas have an aliyah, Crank Rafia, Velti Yashir Hashem Lataliah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael a good Gaben Shtiah.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen, amen.
Steve, I think you sent us that chart by Chabad, or sent me a chart about what's okay and not okay for during the right, Bain has it right, Sareem.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just sent
very
it to you.
nice. Good, thank you. Okay. When I prepared this section of the Gemara, okay, I wanted to, was thinking that it seemed to bring in a number of, I want to say, outside issues. Okay, and even though it's a little bit shorter section, that doesn't necessarily make it any easier. Okay, and so I want to just introduce it by pointing out that, remember, through most of the Gemara, we've talked about shiurim, particularly with regards to food, okay? And we said that was usually a beitza, all right? At other times, we've talked about shiurim as a kazayas, right? When we've talked about tuma, we talked about shiurim, right? How much of a bone or a piece of flesh or things like that, right? So as we come into today's Gemara, okay, we're really starting on the very bottom of 78b, okay? And you may ask, well, what connection does it have to do with our previous topic of those items that were considered afflictions on Yom Kippur? we really, so to speak, backtrack and say, well, if we said that there was a prohibition of eating or drinking on Yom Kippur, do we not need to have some sort of measurement to clarify if and when the person is chayiv or not? Okay? So having sort of tried to tie the pieces together a little bit, okay, we come back now to, as I said, the end, last line, right? 78b, ha'ochel kekotevet hagasa, one who's going to eat a, what we'll call for the moment, a large date amount, by Rav Papa. Okay, since the Mishnah referred to this, okay, as an amount of food being eaten on Yom Kippur, for which one is chayiv, it's going to be natural that the discussion then ensues not simply about how big is this large date, what does it include, but other measurements as well. And so as we proceed with 79a, Kikotevet Shamru Bagar Inata, are we talking about a large date and we're including its pit? Okay. Oh, below Garinata, or are we not including its pit? By Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi therefore asks the following: Etzem Kiseora, when we talk about a bone, a piece of bone that's going to render tumah, right? And we said that its measurement is the size of a barley corn, right? Is that what we're talking about? Bikli pata, do we include its, let's call it outer crust, all right, its husk, or below klipata, or is it without its husk? Bilacha, or biyavesha, are we talking about when it's wet, or are we talking about when it's dry, right? So again, question. Furthermore, Rav Ashi lo mabaya lehad Rav Papa. Rav Ashi did not ask or ponder the question that Rav Papa asked. Gasa itmar. It clearly says a large date. Kol kama de gasa. All the more, okay, that it's stating that, meaning as large as possible. Rav Papa, Loma Ba'ayale, had the Rav Ashi. And Rav Papa didn't ask the Shaila or deal with the question that bothered, right, Rav Ashi. Why? Shibolet Mikre. Because Rav Ashi would, right? Because if Lecha, if it's wet, Shibolet Mikre, it has a different name. It's called the Shibolet, right? Whereas Shelo B'Klipata, when we're talking then about a barley grain not in its husk, Ushla Mikre, it's called something else, namely Ushla. Okay, it's a different name, and therefore that's the point. Now, Amar Rava Amar Rav Yehuda. Rava said in the name of Rav Yehuda, coming back then to our earlier item about the large date, right? Kehutevet Hagasa Shamru. Talking about this large date, Yitera Mikbeitza. According to Rava, in the name of Rav Yehuda, it's larger than an egg volume. V'kim laho l'Rabbanan, the Bahachi miyadva da'ate. Right? And what happens? Okay, and the sages had this Masorah, let's say. Okay, v'kim laho Rabbanan, the Bahachi mityadva da'ate. And with that, in other words, eating that measurement, okay, of food is satisfying to a person. Okay, they're not, their mind is, they're settled, they're not afflicted, They're not suffering. Okay, so that would be the case. But sir mehachi, but less than that, lo miyatva da'ate, a person still remains afflicted. Okay? So that's why it would seem that it was more than a size of a beitza, and according to Rav and the Rav Yehuda. And in that case, if a person would be over on the prohibition of eating due to affliction on Yom Kippur. So the Gemara, however, challenges. Meitive. We challenge it with the following. Ma'aseh v'heviu l'Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai let'om et hatavshil. There was once an occasion, an incident, and it happened on Sukkot, okay, that they brought Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai a certain amount of food that was cooked, okay, to taste. L'Rabban Gamliel, and also they brought to Rabban Gamliel shtei kotvot d'limayim. They brought him 2 dates and a, let's say, deli, not necessarily a pail, but we might call it a large cup, okay? Cohen wants to translate it as a tankard, okay? Okay. Mug, large mug, right? Okay, of water. V'amru, and they both said, ha'alum l'sukkah, bring them up to the sukkah. V'tani ala, why? Because it was taught about it. Lo mipnei shehalacha kach, not because eating those items were a measure that had to be eaten in the sukkah.
Inside the sukkah.
Ela sheratzu lahachmir al atzma, but rather because they wanted to be more stringent about eating any kinds of food
Outside of the sukkah.
Right? Because we know that with regards to a sukkah, if you eat a temporary item, a snack, for example, it does not necessarily have to be eaten in the sukkah. Right? So let's go on. Ukashenatnu lo l'Rabbi Tzadok ochel pachot mikabetza. And the Gemara goes on to say that when they gave Rabbi Tzadok, okay, an amount of food that was less than the size, the bulk of an egg, netalo b'mapa. He took it using a kerchief, a napkin, or something like that, a cloth. Va'achalo chutz
Excuse me,
l'sukkah.
Rabbi Green.
Yeah.
You said you eat a snack. You do not have to eat it in the sukkah. The snack does not contain any grain, does it?
No, that's right. If it's grain, then it would have to be
Yeah.
eaten in the sukkah. Okay, but notice what's going to happen here. He takes that item of food. Notice they don't say what it is, but it's the size of an egg. He takes it, holding it in a cloth. Va'achalo chutz l'sukkah. He eats it outside of the sukkah. V'lo beiracha charav, and he didn't say a blessing, bench the meals afterwards. Okay. So now, if it had been perhaps fruit, maybe that would be one thing. If it was something of grain, maybe that's problematic, right? So, however, the Gemara continues, ha-kebetza. But how could that have been the case? The Gemara is trying to clarify. Number one, he held it in a cloth so he wouldn't have to wash. Number two, he ate it outside the sukkah. Does that imply it wasn't a fixed meal, but it was just a snack? And number three, does it also imply that it did not include any kind of grain or any kind of fixed item? Okay, but nevertheless, it was the volume of an egg. By sukkah, says the Gemara. Don't we know that if a food that is the excuse me, the measure of volume of an egg is required being eaten in the sukkah? Ve'isalka da'atach kotevet hagasa she'amru yetera mikabetza. And if you're of the opinion that when we say this large date is larger than an egg, hashta shtei kotavot below garina. Here, if we have two dates without their seeds, in other words, without their pits, lo havu kebetza, then they would not be equal to an egg's volume. Kotevet hagasa v'garinata, but a large date with its pit, mihave yetera mikabetza, is it possible then that that would really be larger than an egg volume? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, says Rabbi Yirmiyah, and yes, shtei kotavot below garinatan, two, what we're saying, dates without their pits, lo havu kabetza, they're not equal to an egg volume. Kotevet hagasa v'garinata, but a large date with its pit, have yetera mikabetza, it's possible that it can be larger than an egg volume. Amar Rav Papa, hainu da'amre inshi. This is why people say, tre kabe de tamre, chad kaba de kashiata usriach. Namely, a popular statement, two kav of dates and one kav and more of the pits. That's the situation. That it could be that the pit could be so large that if you once you remove it, then the date itself is actually smaller than the pit. Okay? Now, Rava Amar says, Rava, Hatam, Hainu Tama Mishum Dahavu Le Peri. Rava says, no, the whole issue there is due to the fact that what we're talking about, fruit, and the question of eating fruit outside the sukkah. Now, was fruit eaten as a snack, or was fruit eaten in a sense as part of the meal, as a dessert? Okay. Upere lo ba'u sukkah, according to Rava, and fruit, and we're going to understand it for the moment, okay, in one way, that fruit eaten as a snack certainly does not need to be eaten in the sukkah. Now, let's flip it and give a different explanation for the moment. What kind of fruit are we talking about? Are we talking about fruit that's from the Shiva Minim that are identified with Eretz Yisrael? If that's the case, according to some commentaries, maybe the situation is different in that regard. So let's hold on and see. Meitive, let's raise the following objection. Amar Rebbe. So Rabbi says, K'shahayinu lomdim Torah etzel Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, when we would learn Torah, right, with Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua, what happened? Heviu lefanenu te'enim va'anavim. They brought for us grapes and figs. Va'achalnum achilat ar'i chutz l'sukkah. And we ate them like a snack, I'm going to say, right? A casual meal outside of the sukkah. Achilat ar'i in. As a snack, a casual meal, yes. Achilat keva, lo. But a fixed meal, in other words, if it was part of a regular meal, even fruit the implication would be, no, then that had to be eaten in the sukkah.
Sukkah.
Ema, and therefore I would say, achal num ka'achilat arai chutz l'sukkah. And therefore I would say that if he ate it as a snack, outside, it could be eaten outside the sukkah. Okay? And the implication then is, number one, that fruit is usually eaten as a snack. And number two, that what may not have been the fruits of the Shiva Minim identified with Eretz Yisrael. And so the Gemara continues, Ibayat Ema, if you want, I would say, Achalnu machilat keva. Maybe they ate it as part of a fixed meal. Va'achalnu pat, achilat ari, bahadayu, chutz l'sukkah. Okay, and maybe they ate bread, okay, as a snack, okay, in order to lessen the sweetness of certain fruits. That clearly would be fruits of Shiva Mini outside the sukkah, right? But, says the Gemara, lema masayele. Let's say then that this is going to support the view of Rava, right? The fichach im hishlim b'minei targima. Therefore, if he completed the meal with something sweet, okay, dessert, right? Yatsa, okay, he's fulfilled his obligation of eating in the sukkah. Ve'isalka da'atach pere ba'u sukkah. And if you're of the view that eating fruit, okay, requires being done so in the sukkah, litnei perot, then simply teach this as part of our Mishnah and say that it's a fruit. My minei targima, what do we mean sweets? Perot. We say that may include fruit. V'ibayat ema, and if you want, I might say, ba'atra delo shchiche pere, and that maybe, therefore, it took place in a location where they don't have a lot of fruit. And therefore, since that's the case, okay, therefore fruit would be part of the meal and therefore required in the sukkah. Okay, therefore, as a result, you can't bring any support to that item, to this discussion from that citation. So Rav Zavid Amar, Kotevet Hagasa she'amru chasera mikabetza. Rav Zavid disagrees, and they said a large date is less than, okay? In other words, its volume is less than the size of an egg. Ditznan, as we learned elsewhere in a Mishnah, Beit Shammai Omrim, Se'or B'Kazeret. Namely, that according to Beit Shammai, when you have leaven, all right, and the Se'or is leaven, B'Kazayet, then its volume is the size of an olive. Okay? Chametz B'Chakotevet. And if you have chametz and its size is that of a date, then in those cases, okay, if it's regarding Pesach, right, you would be over on Bal Yoroi, Bal Yamatzeh. Okay? And so that would seem to suggest that maybe a Ktevet Gasa, okay, is not necessarily a shiur parallel or more than an egg, but less than an egg volume. Vahavin and ba, and we discussed about this the following. My tama de Beit Shammai, what was the reasoning of Beit Shammai? Nichtov rachmana chametz, v'lo bai se'or. Let the Torah simply have said chametz, okay, where we said that was a basic prohibition, right? And not even deal with the question of se'or, okay, of leaven. Va'ana amina, and therefore I would say under these circumstances, umech hametz she'ein chimutzo kasher, whereas I might say that where leavened bread, okay, that its leavening process, okay, is not right so strong. Asur b'kazayit, it is forbidden with a small measure of an olive. So'or, leaven, okay, shechimutzo kasher, that its leavening ability is so much stronger. Lo kol shekain, all the more so. In other words, I would do a kal v'chomer, okay, and get my result without having the Torah specify. Mitapalginhu rachmana, but since the Torah we see divides the two of them up, limda it comes to teach us shiuro shel zeh lo k'shiuro shel zeh, that the measurement of one is not like the measurement of another. Okay? So, or b'kazayit v'chametz b'cha kotevet, namely that the measurement for the leaven is that of an olive's bulk, whereas the measurement for leavened bread, chametz, is that of a what we said is a date. So now the Gemara clarifies, Ve'isalka da'ata, kotevet hagasa she'amru. If now you're going to think that this large date of which we've been talking about, Yetera mikabetza, is larger than an egg volume. Mikdi Beit Shammai Ashiura. Okay. Why then, when we deal with the example of Beit Shammai and we're dealing with this shiur, Dinafish mikzayit kamahadre, okay, that it's considered, okay, a size that's larger than that of an olive. Litnei kibetza. Why not simply teach it as a egg volume? V'inami, and if that's the case also, ki hadade ninhu, okay, and if we want to say that one is like the other, nitnei kibetza, then teach it again as equal to an egg volume. Ela lav shmamina kotevet pechuta mikabetza. But therefore, isn't it not that we learn from this or derive from this that the large date is smaller than the egg volume? Okay? Mimai, asks the Gemara, what proof do you have? On what basis? Dilma olam emalach. Perhaps I would say to you the following. Kotevet hagasa she'amru. This large date that we've been talking about. Yiterami kabetza, and we say that it's larger than an egg volume. Stama, that's in general kabetza. It's like a normal size egg. Ve'inami, or if we want, we could also say ki hadade minhu, if they're both somewhat similar. V'chada minayhu nakat, and therefore they simply chose to use one term as opposed to the other to clarify the volume. Elamehacha, but rather perhaps from here we can derive proof. Ad kama mizamnin, how much is needed for one to eat in order to say the zimun on Birkat HaMazon? Ad kazayit, up to an olive's amount, divrei Rabbi Meir. That's the view of Rabbi Meir. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ad kibetza, he claims it has to be up to an olive, up to an egg amount. B'mai kemifalge, what are they really arguing about? Rabbi Meir savar, Rabbi Meir is of the opinion, v'achalta, when it says v'achalta uveirachta et Hashem elkecha, right, and so on. V'achalta, and you eat, zo achila. It means it has to mean actual eating. And what's the shiur always been for eating? Beitza. V'savata, and that you're satisfied. Zoshia, that refers to drinking. Va'achila b'kazayit. And as we said, okay, the normal minimum shiur for a food stuff is a olives amount. Rabbi Yehuda savar va'achalta v'savata. Rabbi Yehuda says you take the two words together. Okay, achila sheyesh ba svia. We're talking about eating an amount of food that satisfies. Ve'eza, and how much is that? Ze kebetza. That has to be a egg volume. Okay? Otherwise, the person is not considered satisfied. Ve'isalka da'atach kotevet hagasa she'amru yetera k'mebetza. And if you're of the view that this large date that we've been talking about, okay, is larger than an egg, hashta kebetza sabue misba. Then wouldn't we have to say that if an egg bulk satisfies a person, certainly this large date should satisfy a person as well, okay? And if that's the case, then again we come that it does not indicate that it means the person was over on the inui, on the affliction of not eating for Yom Kippur. Okay? Da'ata lo miyadva. Does that mean that his mind is settled, that he's not doesn't feel afflicted? Ela lav shmamina. Rather, don't we learn from this that kotevet hagasa she'amru, that this larger date that we've been talking about, pachot mikabetza, that it's got to be less than the volume of an egg. Kabetza, and if it's like equal to the volume of an egg, masba'a, it then satisfies the person. Kekotevet, and if it's like a date, miyatva da'ate. Okay, then when that's the case, it settles his mind, and he has been over on the volume, not eating on Yom Kippur. Now, Tanya Rabbi Omer, and then the Braita continues, a new Braita, and I'm just going to do this just a little bit. Okay, Kol Hashiurin Kulan B'Kazayit. According to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the majority of measurements are identified with an olives amount. Chutz mitum'at ochli, with the exception of situations where food transmit tuma. Sheshina hakatuv b'mashma'an. Why? Because the verses in the Torah changed the language, their expression. V'shinu chachamim b'shiuran, and the sages changed the measure. Uraya ledavar Yom HaKippurim, and the proof of the text is there on Yom Kippur. Ma'ishna hakatuv b'mashma'o. What did the sages change in terms of the language? Mi lo tu'uneh, where it says, right, that you shall, okay, not be afflicted. Umay shinui chachamim b'shiurei, and what did the sages change in its volume and its measurement? Ka kotevet, like the size of a large date bulk. Okay, so we're going to stop there, and it will pick up back. Well, actually, let's go just a couple more, a line or two more, and then we'll be good. Umay raya ledavar Yom HaKippurim, and what was the source, therefore, for Yom Kippur? De'ime hatam, because if the proof is from there, hava amina orcha dekrahu. Okay, then we could say that it's the style of the pasuk, okay, and maybe it doesn't, not an issue of halakha to be derived from it? Okay, the answer is no, that when the language of the pasuk varies, therefore the new halacha is taught. So there we'll stop. Okay, at that point we'll pick up tomorrow. Okay, and deal a little bit more with some of these issues of the measurement and the food. Okay, so everybody take care. Have a good day. And
I did email a copy of the chart to all of us.